Good morning. I'm Tara Clapp. I'm the Senior Manager with the Columbia Basin Watershed Network, and welcome to the last in our spring webinar series. Today we have Coree Tull and Megan Peloso to talk about what the Freshwater Alliance is doing, and their title is Healthy Communities, Economies, and Ecosystems Advancing Collaborative Freshwater Solutions in BC. So welcome, everyone. A lot of familiar names on that list. Hi, everybody. Just a few things before we begin. And if you have a connection issue, you get dropped off the webinar, if you could just sign back on using the link, that would be the best thing. I will be monitoring the chat box, but I'm not really, and to a certain extent, my email. If you do have trouble, I may be able to help you, but just keep trying. What we're going to do is, for the most part, the participants are on what's called a blanket mute. So unless I do something special, we won't be able to hear you talk. So what we'd like you to do is use the chat box to any questions you have as we're going along, and then we will have a question period at the end. So, and at that point, I'll be able to make it so that some of you can talk as that. So again, our speakers today, you can see them on the webcam or on the screen, are Coree Tull, who's the organizing director for the Freshwater Alliance, and Megan Peloso, who's BC Communications lead, which most of us know, many of us in the basin know Megan from her former role with the Lake Windermere ambassadors. So welcome to our speakers. And what I'd like to start, and where we would like to start today, is with a little poll. So I'm going to launch the polling for you. So we just have a couple of sort of introductory questions. One is just to try to figure out who we have on the call in sort of a geographic way. And then it's actually one of the survey questions that's going to be on a Freshwater Alliance survey. So we want to just start you thinking down that same path. So we thought we'd give you that question. So if you could, we've got one person. I wish I could, okay, two. I wish I could figure out, how to give a prize to the first person that answered the poll. So here we go. It's coming along. We'll just give you guys maybe another minute. Uh-oh. That's Belle. Okay. We've slowed down. There's 6 people have responded out of all the people on the call. Oh, there we go. I think Belle will stop barking in a minute. Okay, so just to give a little summary of where we are. So nice distribution. Everyone who answered on the poll today is from inside BC though. East Kootenay, West Kootenay. Oh, sorry, East Kootenay, West Kootenay, North Columbia, and so mostly inside the basin and with some outside of the basin. I just got a chat notice from Cedra Eichenauer, who's actually logged in so that Janet Spicer can participate. So I just thought I'd let the panelists know that. So in terms of what are the critical water challenges you or your organization are seeing or anticipating in 2018, we have multiple answers on this one, but the bigger choices are drought or low flows, flooding, these are the top ones, and land-based activities on fresh water with warming temperatures coming in close second. So, and the last two are pollution or other, with just one response each. So thanks, you guys. So what I wanted to, with that, I'm going to ask Coree to go ahead and grab the screen sharing, and we'll get these guys started on their presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Tara. Just give me one moment. I'm going to turn my video off. Great. Well, thank you so much, Tara, for inviting us to present today. It's a pleasure to speak to the Columbia Basin Water Network and connect with new folks within the freshwater community across BC. As Tara mentioned, my name's Coree Tull, and I'm the organizing director with the Canadian Freshwater Alliance, and I'm based in Vancouver on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And I would like to introduce you to my colleague, Megan.
Thanks, Corey. Yeah, it's great to be here. My name is Megan. I do know a few of you on the call from my work in Invermere with the Lake Windermere Ambassadors, and I can see that Thea is on the line. So it's great to see familiar names in the Columbia Basin. I am joining the call from the unceded Wet'suwet'en territory in Smithers, and I work with Corey and the rest of the Freshwater Alliance team as the BC Communications Lead, and I'm looking forward to this presentation today.
Wonderful. Well, so today we're going to jump into healthy communities, economies, and ecosystems, and how through advancing a collaborative freshwater solution and conversation, we can achieve that here in BC. So we'll jump right into it. We'll quickly run through sort of who is the Freshwater Alliance for those of you who perhaps have never had contact with us or aren't familiar. We'll talk a little bit about sort of the history of water sustainability in BC and how we've gotten to where we are today. We'll look at what are some of the water challenges that are currently British Columbians are currently facing, our current water moment, and what opportunities are available to us. We'll talk a little bit about how we can advance moments of political influence to see action around freshwater in BC. And then we'll speak a little bit to Our Water BC, which is looking at how we can advance these collaborative freshwater solutions and Our Water BC is a joint initiative. And then we'll speak a little bit more about moving forward and how together we can defend our shared waters. So we'll jump right into it here. So the Canadian Freshwater Alliance is a project of the Tides Canada shared platform, and we are working towards a future where anyone anywhere in the country can be assured their waters are healthy and safe. In order to ensure our waters are healthy and thriving for current and future generations, we believe we need a deeper and swifter action on rules that impact the health of our freshwater. And to see this happen, we need to ensure the freshwater community here in British Columbia and across Canada is equipped with the tools needed to better organize their communities and members, to better communicate out issues and advocate for change at all levels of government. So just to get us started and sort of thinking about the history of where we've come from in our province and what opportunities we have today to advance the bigger conversation and action around water sustainability in BC, we thought we'd walk through sort of how we got to today in 2018. So in going back over 100 years, to 1909, the Water Act was first enacted, and it didn't really change much until it was repealed more than 100 years later in 2016. And so the primary purpose really of the Water Act when it came in was to facilitate gold mining and agricultural development. And so it wasn't by any means an environmental law. And it really ignored Indigenous water rights, and it implicitly denied them by asserting provincial ownership over water in BC. Core principles of colonial water law were really embedded in the Water Act on what's called first in time, first in right, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. So those who began using water first and received their licenses first had priority over anybody else. And particularly in times of scarcity, senior license holders had first access to their entire allocation before anybody else did. And that really didn't take into consideration the rights and needs of water within Indigenous communities. So now if we fast forward to 2008, this is when the province came up with what was called the Living Water Smart Strategy. And this was really the genesis of the new Water Sustainability Act that we currently have in place in the province. And it really set out the province's vision for how we could protect water in our province. And it included 43 specific actions and commitments and targets, including a commitment to update BC's water laws by 2012. And then in 2009, there were several years of Water Act modernization, which really included opportunities for public comment and input. And I can imagine many of you were probably a part of that input process. And Our Water BC really came to life during this time as an opportunity to engage the freshwater community around providing that input. In May 2014 was when the BC government at the time passed the Water Sustainability Act into law. So it came into law, but it wasn't actually brought into effect until 2 years later in February 2016. And that's when we welcomed the Water Sustainability Act really coming into force. And the first regulations included groundwater protection, dam safety, and water sustainability as the core of the groundwater licensing regulations. There's no doubt some concerns around those new regulations, but the province is currently moving forward in trying to license the existing wells within our province to better regulate our groundwater right now. And then it leaves us ultimately to today, where we're encouraged to see some government commitments to leadership on fresh water, as this really is such a critical time to take substantive action for the protection of our economy and communities and health, as all of these are supported by our province's water. And so right now, in 2018, we see this as a time for our province to really be true leaders in ensuring water is a critical priority for their government and moving forward in the actions that they take to protect BC's fresh water.
So meanwhile, while all of this is taking place, the need to manage our use of water sustainably is becoming all the more urgent and evident as weather and climate changes intensify water insecurity across the province. Last year, 62% of water basins in BC experienced extreme or very dry drought conditions. It was certainly a hot one in the Kootenays, with snowpack diminishing more quickly than normal and affecting water availability, not just for the public, but also for fighting fires. And this led to mandatory conservation measures put in place for water in places like Nelson, Fernie, Cranbrook, and Invermere. Unfortunately, according to predictions, this year is shaping up to be another hot and dry summer. Metro Vancouver has already alerted the public that they will be initiating water restrictions as early as May 1st in preparation for this. And yet at the same time in the Okanagan, flooding is a real and present risk. We've all heard this number now, 152% of normal snowpack there and warmer temperatures on the horizon. But as we can imagine, with an increasingly evident gap in water security and sustainability comes a clear need for implementing changes to the status quo. Illustrating this, 85% of the province-wide survey respondents have strongly agreed or agree that local watershed entities are needed to ensure that BC's Water Sustainability Act is implemented to its fullest potential. And we believe that the public and professional concern that is rising about current water management and governance prove that a real appetite for change exists. Finally, water remains a high and increasing priority for communities, citizens, agriculture, and industry across the province, and it drives the economy. 93% of British Columbians agree that freshwater is our most precious resource. It's also a very important opportunity or priority for many Indigenous nations who are in the midst of a struggle for recognition of their inherent rights and title over territories that include both land and water. And these elements taken together reveal the potential of a powerful water opportunity.
So as Megan mentioned, weather and climate changes intensify water insecurity across the province. It's really time for smart, prudent, and forward-thinking management of our water supplies. Lurching from crisis to crisis lowers our resilience, and it costs more in the long run to both the environment and our economy. There are many competing demands and worthy causes for our government to consider. However, it's important to remember that water is connected to all of these issues and needs to be made a priority now. So over the past year, we've seen some important commitments in election platforms and mandate letters, which, if acted upon, lay the foundation for better decision-making and management of our shared waters. You'll notice on the left-hand side, the arrow with the commitments. These are commitments that we've seen made by the province in the last year. So we've seen a commitment to modernizing land use planning in the mandate letter from the Premier to the Minister of Forest and Lands Natural Resource Operations. He directed Doug Donaldson to work with the Minister of Indigenous Relations and First Nations and communities to modernize land use planning and sustainably manage BC's ecosystems, rivers, lakes, watersheds, and forests. If this is made a real priority, there's an opportunity to implement watershed-focused planning, which is a necessary and critical foundation for resilient watersheds and sustainable rural economies. The second commitment we've seen is a commitment to reviewing water rental rates. In its election platform, the BC NDP committed to reviewing the Water Sustainability Act to ensure that high-volume water users are paying for access fairly. If this is a prioritized commitment, there's the potential to have additional revenue sources which could be available to ensure sufficient resources are available to fund development and implementation of new regulations and to support water sustainability in local watersheds and for stewardship efforts. We've also seen a strong commitment to the full implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. This government's made it very clear how important UNDRIP and reconciliation is with First Nations communities across the province. If we see this continued prioritization around UNDRIP and reconciliation, funding could be provided directly to First Nations to ensure capacity to participate in local led watershed governance initiatives, as well as developing a provincial environmental flow regulation, which is critical to upholding Indigenous rights to water. The last piece that we've seen strong commitments are around ecosystem-based management. And so we've seen a commitment to taking evidence-based science approach and using ecosystem-based management in addition to addressing the cumulative effects of development on ecosystems and watersheds. Now, if this is prioritized, there's an important opportunity to develop a rigorous provincial strategy for water monitoring and data, which builds capacity to collect, store, and analyze, as well as report on data, including incorporating Indigenous knowledge into this. Now, we have seen some actions to date that it hasn't just been commitments to advance sort of this bigger freshwater conversation. We saw the review on the Halkar Aquifer report, which has the potential to really point our province in a new direction if those recommendations on source water protection are implemented province-wide. And we've also seen most recently an agreement with the province and the Nicola First Nations to work together to co-design and implement a watershed governance pilot. And these are phenomenal first steps in moving forward and how we're effectively making decisions and managing our fresh water in BC. These commitments and actions are extremely encouraging, but without explicitly stated without water explicitly stated as a critical priority in mandates and the budget, we're not seeing the adequate follow through into action. And so we see this right now as a unprecedented opportunity for really communities across the province to advance improvements on the way water is managed by demonstrating collectively that protecting our freshwater is a priority for our government, that our government needs to make. And for this to be successful, we need to ensure local community groups have the tools and resources they need to tell their stories, come together, organize, and really demand that action. We see the next 6 months as really a critical window for laying the foundation while our elected officials are in their home ridings to ensuring our government is seeing how important freshwater is to British Columbians from every corner of this province. This is possible by really leveraging these critical moments of influence in each of our watersheds. And so you'll see there in that center, these are just a few examples of some critical political influence moments that we can utilize to push water to be a priority. Through a united message, we can put water back on the political agenda. And we recognize that seizing these moments of political influence can be a challenge for freshwater groups because of capacity limitations. And so we acknowledge that, and Megan will speak to that a little bit more.
Thanks, Corey. Yeah, so I had the pleasure of presenting a survey that was done earlier this year, and what we did was we asked freshwater community members to fill out this survey so that we could learn more about what they're doing and what kinds of support would best help them to meet their goals. And we asked members this question, what is your biggest challenge? And so that's what you see on the right side of the screen. In the illustration, the challenges most highly ranked as the most difficult are at the top. And as it progresses downwards, these challenges are ranked less burdensome. So thankfully, most people are getting at least some time, number 10 challenge, to go paddling and have fun on the water. So that's a good sign, but it's still a challenge. So if you would like to chime in here in the chat box, I would invite you to type in which of these challenges resonates the most with you, or if there's something that you don't see in this graphic, but consider to be a major obstacle in your work, then definitely throw that in the chat box as well. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to review the top 3 challenges here. So the biggest challenge, not surprising, is capacity. And this is likely familiar to everyone, no matter where you are or what size of organization you're coming from. It's basically the people power to get done the work that needs to get done. The second biggest challenge is influencing decisions. In other words, that's influencing the people who make policy and funding decisions that ultimately directly impacts our capacity to do our work. And closely related to that, the third biggest challenge is influencing the public. And the things that strike me about these 3 challenges is first that they're not new, they're quite persistent, and in that way, they're very worthy of our collective focus and investment. And secondly, they're not the kinds of challenges that are going to be effectively overcome single-handedly or as lone wolves. And if you'd like to see the full report on the survey, including more of an in-depth analysis on the challenges and what the Canadian Freshwater Alliance is doing to try to support groups to overcome these, you can go to the link at the bottom of the slide. It's on our website. And check that out. There are lots of great visuals that my colleague Christine Metler has put together. So it's a great summary. So I don't see anything in the chat box here. Tara, do you see anything that people might have put forward as challenges?
I'm not, no one's taken the opportunity. The only thing I was thinking about is I did want to mention that we get these same priorities on our member survey. So I was quite, I mean, not that they're, I know they're kind of what you'd expect. It's just that we're getting the same set of challenges across the province. It's my observation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Tara. And I do see one comment has come in now from Annette that certainly these challenges are common to work on all environmental issues. I think that's a good point, that these aren't just freshwater stewardship challenges, but but challenges that environmental work across many different kinds of organizations and different focus areas will experience. So that's a good point to make. Well, I guess that's an indication too that we've hopefully covered a lot of the challenges that are really top of mind for folks. That's a good sign too.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks for those who offered comments around some of the challenges your groups are facing. I wanted to just quickly touch on that, building off of some of those capacity challenges and outline some of the work that Our Water BC is doing, which is a joint initiative under the Freshwater Alliance. And Our Water BC works with organizations, groups, and individuals who are united in our efforts to leave a legacy for waters in British Columbia. And by supporting community-based water decision-making, that puts local values at the forefront. Through Our Water BC, we currently are working with 14 groups across the province. And we really believe that when communities are informed and given the opportunity to be a part of the dialogue, we start to see firsthand how decisions affecting local watersheds really can be improved. And so we're working directly with groups to sort of look at how can we address some of these capacity challenges in moving forward to address these bigger provincial issues that are impacting our watersheds.
Thanks, Corey. So based on some of those persistent challenges that we saw in the couple of slides earlier, and the learning that the Freshwater Alliance has done over the past 6 years of organizing, we see some real opportunities for collaboration that can unite our efforts and make them stronger, more influential, and also make our individual lone wolf capacities go farther. One of the ways that we can do this is through messaging and communication support. And the objective isn't just to get more stories out so that everywhere people go, they will hear about water, although that's part of it for sure. But to be a little bit more strategic, how can we amplify local water stories so that they are heard by a wider audience, and that when decision makers hear about them, they know that it isn't just one group asking for change, but the whole freshwater community. And the change being asked for is clear, and also that the tools for the change are clear. So while we've mentioned this already, but local water issues are very different, and that can't be overstated. Ultimately, none of us wants a Band-Aid solution. And this is how, by uniting our voices and finding the commonality in our experiences, we can justify a more ambitious call to action for freshwater protection across BC communities. And some examples of how we can do that is through coordinated letters to provincial representatives, op-eds, press releases, message toolkits around a united ask for things like environmental flow needs, for example, and coordinating our government relations work.
Another really critical component of leveraging our water opportunities is to build our capacity and power to advance improvements on the way water is managed in local watersheds and across the province. For this to be successful, we need to ensure that local community groups have those tools and resources they need to tell their stories, come together, organize, and demand the action needed. Through supporting engagement, organizing face-to-face conversations with the public, driving action on community-based water priorities, through access to digital engagement tools, we can strategically bring the public along with us as we unite our voices across the province. At the Freshwater Alliance, we're big believers in not recreating the wheel. Although from different watersheds, freshwater organizations across the province are dealing with different challenges, but similar challenges at the same time. Whether it's logging in your watershed, increasing droughts, or contaminated drinking water, there's an opportunity to learn from each other's wins and our losses so that collectively we can do better. The last piece is around really mobilizing communities and decision makers. And so amplifying our water stories and engaging our communities are critical freshwater steps to show that freshwater is a priority for British Columbians. But the final piece is really critical to seeing that action follow through. And so we activate the audiences and communities we have been building when we have unique opportunities to really solve those issues. So for example, we've got a provincial election, or a municipal election for that matter. We have a new budget or new mandate letters, or there's a hot issue that pushes the work that we've been doing into the mainstream. And this is where we're able to really mobilize in critical mass our supporter base and British Columbians who are ready to then demand that action for our waters. And this is where the amplifying and engaging is really a critical step in moving forward to us mobilizing to see that follow through at the provincial or federal or municipal level. And so as British Columbians are becoming more and more aware of the importance of freshwater and are conscious that this precious resource comes into that next 6-month critical period of building and leveraging capacity on the ground in our local watersheds to unify that freshwater community, which allows us to then mobilize when the opportunity is right.
Thanks, Corey. Yeah, so, I mean, we certainly don't, not excited about water insecurity, but the opportunity that it presents to see water be made a priority moving forwards for the province of BC with the right sort of unity in freshwater groups is something we are excited about. And we know that each community is quite unique, each watershed is unique, and we want to help each group see the change that they want to see in their local watersheds. We think this benefits all of us across BC. But to amplify messaging and communications around these local challenges in each watershed effectively, it's important to us that we get it right and that we know the complexity of the issues that all of us are facing and the support that would help each group specifically grow their impact. So help us help you by filling out a short survey that we have put together. It should only take 5 to 10 minutes depending on the detail of your responses. But it's a survey that will help us to connect with you after this presentation and question period. Should you if this presentation has interested you and you want to get involved in our Water BC, the survey will certainly help us identify areas of potential support. So I encourage you to fill that out when you have 5 to 10 minutes, and we'd love to hear from you.
Megan, what's the URL where people could go to that survey?
So the slide here is linked where it says our Water BC survey. I can put the URL in the chat box as well. If that's easiest for everyone. Yeah, no problem.
So we want to thank you for joining us today, and as we walk through sort of collaborative solutions to moving forward around our healthy communities, economies, and watersheds. I have to thank our funders that help make the work we do possible, because we couldn't do it without them. And we are open to questions. So if you have some questions about work that your groups are doing in your watersheds, opportunities to get engaged and involved, we are here to answer those questions. So feel free to start putting them into the comment box and we can go from there.
Thanks very much, Corey and Megan. We have one question already from Rory Gallagher from Nelson. He would like to know, could you reiterate what you mentioned regarding increased monitoring as part of the Water Sustainability Act?
Well, I think I can start with, and hopefully Corey, you'll just jump in if you have something to add. Mm-hmm. I think that what you're referring to, Rory, hopefully, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the water opportunity slide that included the commitments, the moments of political influence, and the actions that we can be taking in the next 6 months to a year. And one of those was that we really feel like there is an opportunity right now to enhance the provincial strategy for water monitoring. And that is partially because there is a commitment in the mandate letter from the Premier for ecosystem-based management. And so this is a way that we feel like we can sort of utilize the commitments that have already been made by the province to point to actions that can be taken for freshwater protection, and in this way sort of fulfill the commitments being made, and really illustrate for the province the connection between a need for coordinated water monitoring and how that feeds back into ecosystem-based management. Does that help to answer your question, Rory?
The other piece I would just add on that is that as we are seeing sort of these increases in water insecurity throughout our province, we're able to point to the need for that provincial-wide data monitoring, program in order for our decision makers to be making more informed decisions around our water, and a water monitoring system is, as Megan said, a clear path forward with a tangible solution to better protect and manage the systems that we do have.
If I could just add, we were discussing at the spring meeting the relationship between the data and the regulatory framework. We were talking about the potential, it's another opportunity-based thing that the province is working on in the resources side, a cumulative effects monitoring framework, which is obviously going to include, I find it obvious, is going to include aquatic ecosystems and aquatic, I spoke to a local government official who wants water as the most important valued component in that cumulative effects monitoring framework, cumulative effects management framework. So whether it's an ecosystem-based planning framework, whether or not it's, or if there's a cumulative effects management framework that's part of that, whatever planning framework is put in place, it's going to need a data framework to go along with it. So that was a long way of adding to that.
Yeah, thanks, Tara. And I think like a tangible example is if we look at environmental flow regulations, the current law under the Water Sustainability Act requires decision makers to consider environmental flows in license decisions and short-term protections during droughts. But when sort of what decision makers must consider doesn't really provide sufficient protections to ensure water for nature, and the policy isn't binding. And so it's a little bit unclear as exactly what decision makers must consider when they're evaluating those environmental flow needs in their license decisions. And so because we don't have the sort of robust monitoring program that leaders in water sustainability across the province have been outlining, and I know groups in the Columbia Basin have been doing a ton of work around, it's leaving us really with like a non-transparent and non-legally binding process for really making those decisions and putting forward those safeguards. And so that's just maybe another tangible example, specifically connected to the Water Sustainability Act, where a robust provincial monitoring program could be extremely valuable.
Okay, what's the name? I was just checking to see if I was muted. I would like to ask a question about communications support for groups in the Columbia Basin. So what's the process or timing, or do you want to find out who is interested in support, or can you talk a little bit more about how some of the Columbia Basin groups could link up with the Freshwater Alliance?
Sure, yeah, that's, I'd be happy to. So the Freshwater Alliance, and specifically Our Water BC, as we said earlier, is an initiative to amplify So groups that have work that's going on in their watersheds that are looking to scale up their communications to a more provincial level or a more provincial audience, there are ways that we can do that. And it was mentioned in the presentation, some of the tools that we can use. Some of them are digital, some of them are events and organizing. And it really depends on what the group is planning to do, what their work plans are in the next few months. And the survey gets at some of those questions and kind of helps us to feel out where each group might be at in terms of their planning and the communications goals that they have. So I hesitate to sort of blanket statement, what we can do, because as I said, I think it's really important to tailor to each watershed and to the community capacity that's in place and the goals that the organization or individual has. So hopefully through the survey, we can get at least past that initial conversation, and then we can follow up on specific areas that we can support your group.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm just monitoring for questions here on the chat or the question and answer box.
Maybe while we're waiting for some other questions to come in, I'm sorry, I can't see the question box, so I can't see if questions are coming in, but just to add on Megan's point there, specifically around the communications support or organizing support for that matter, definitely sort of we want it to be locally driven, and so we need to find those sort of unique priorities by watershed. But ultimately, our goal moving forward is to be able to, provide some clear messaging which allows us to unite our asks. So we're focusing on those local challenges and calling for those actions that we need in those local watersheds, while being able to kind of bridge our conversations to where the province can go with concrete, tangible asks. And so that's something that we can work with groups on supporting their communications out to their members, their, around writing op-eds and whatnot. And that's something we can build out a plan with each of the groups. And specifically with regards to organizing, again, this is where we can support with some digital organizing tools, which will help you to mobilize people in your communities to action or support bringing them together. And we can support with some of the strategic elements of how to do that and how to build the capacity in order to better bring those community members together, to have the conversations that need to happen, to engage, to educate, and to ultimately bring people to a place where they are all calling for the same change that we need at the province.
Thank you. I'm just looking at I'm thinking about several watershed groups that are very small, that have very shared challenges. And I noticed the folks I have on the call today aren't from those groups, but I'll probably get that message out to them, or maybe share this webinar with those groups so that they can do the survey and sort of think about how to develop this communications platform.
That would be great. Thanks, Tara.
I'm just looking, I don't see any more questions coming in. And there's no rule, there's no rule that we have to stay right till 11. So we're going to give you another minute to ask a question, and if nobody does, then we're just going to we're going to conclude. How's that? So
sounds great.
Okay. So the groups that you're currently working with Our Water BC, do you sort of meet with them individually and help them work on their communications platform, or do you sort of, how does it practically work?
Yeah,
Like,
so
you meet with them every week or every month, or?
yeah, the groups we've been working with in different areas across the province, we've just got a couple new folks on, so we haven't started those conversations yet. But the groups we have been working with throughout the Fraser Valley and on Vancouver Island, we meet with them. We establish local priorities and areas that they want to continue to advance bigger conversations. We support them around how to effectively communicate out their issues to the media, to their members, to the public. We support government relations work to bring those messages to their elected officials and help coordinate those meetings. We work with them around hosting events to, again, better advance the asks that we're looking for within those watersheds and at a bigger provincial level to see action on the commitments that have been made. And so we are looking at right now rolling out a water dialogue series, which will look at how we can continue to amplify those water conversations throughout the province. So that's sort of another tangible way that we're doing that on the ground already with groups now. And one of the things that is really important is that, as I mentioned around, how do we learn from each other and not recreate wheels if there's like the community in Weimar that's working towards protecting their watershed from logging. And there's communities on Vancouver Island that are facing the same different challenges because of land grants and whatnot, but ultimately they want to protect their watersheds from logging. And so how can we learn from each other? And so right now we have a quarterly call that brings groups together to learn from each other and to prioritize and talk to each other about strategies that have worked and strategies that haven't and lessons learned, so that we effectively across the province as a freshwater community can be more efficient in the work that we're doing. And so those are some ideas and examples of sort of hands-on tangible work that we're doing through Our Water BC on the ground. And so it's exciting, and there's lots to be done, and lots of relationship building to be made to make the freshwater community that much stronger and that much more united in our work that we do.
Well, that's good. Meanwhile, we do have a couple more questions coming in. I think everyone can read Thea's question if they had that window open, but I'm just going to read it. So the first step is to fill out the Our Water BC survey, and then Freshwater Alliance will follow up with each group individually. That was the question.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and I just mentioned that there is an option at the end of the survey to include your contact information, and that will make it much easier for us to follow up.
Yes.
Just an FYI.
Yes, it's this actually linking to decision makers and to other groups across the province is really a really great opportunity. So then a question from Annette Ludeman in Golden. We're working on a collaborative project for educational signage in the Columbia wetlands around responsible recreation to prevent water pollution and protect wildlife values. Can Our Water BC help us with this in any way? And we require more funding for this project.
I think possibly. I think we should have a conversation and see sort of what those local priorities are around your end goals, and where there's potential opportunities to leverage either municipal or provincial decision makers, and what that looks like, and then specifically around the funding piece. We as the Freshwater Alliance don't directly provide grants as like a foundation, but there may be opportunities for us to introduce or connect you to other foundations or groups that do provide funding. So if there's some that you're not familiar with, we could perhaps try to help connect you and build those relationships for additional funding support within your watershed.
It's interesting, if I could just add, Annette, I think you're probably also talking about that low speed zone in the wetlands, which is a case where there was, after a long time, actual policy passed for reduced speed limits. But then there is the next step in terms of when you get something like that done as a policy, there is the next part, which is actually implementing it after the rule is passed. So that's, if I'm thinking of the right thing, that is just the next step.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like without really totally knowing or understanding the exact sort of challenge and that's happening in that, like specifically for you folks in Golden, there are certain provincial things around water objectives which start to connect sort of decisions that are made on the land and how that impacts the water. I don't know if this is a specific example that would really apply, because often water objectives could be looked at like logging practices and how and resource sort of licenses that are issued and how they impact drinking water. But again, there may be possible opportunities. And so again, that would be a good opportunity for us to connect and speak a bit more directly around the work that's happening there and what the ultimate outcomes are that you're looking for.
Okay, thank you. So I think that appears to be all the questions. If something occurs to you afterwards in terms of a question, you're welcome to email me. Annette was just clarifying my misunderstanding. She says there are not new speed limits, but horsepower limits. Implementation is where we're at on that one. We're also working on land management and freshwater impact. So I think there's a lot to talk about there for sure.
Great, that's wonderful. Yeah, and if people do have any additional questions, both mine and Megan's email addresses are on the bottom of the slide here, and please don't hesitate to reach out to us and ask us questions. And if you do fill out the survey, we'll be in contact with you shortly. So thank you.
Oh, that's perfect. Okay. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for coming, and thanks very much to Coree and Megan. I wish we had an applause function on the webinar. It's, thanks very much.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us.
Okay. This sounds like a great opportunity. Thanks.